C.O.P.S, Central Organization of Police Specialists. Fighting crime in a future time. Protecting Empire City from Big Boss and his gang of crooks.
Listen up, because in 1988, Hasbro tried to create the next G.I. Joe, and they almost pulled it off. C.O.P.S, Central Organization of Police Specialists, had everything going for it. Cybernetic heroes, explosive action figures with actual cap-firing guns, and a cartoon that was honestly way better than it had any right to be. But here's the thing. Within 2 years, it was dead. Gone. Wiped off the shelves like it never existed. So what the hell happened? How does a toy line, backed by one of the biggest companies in the world, with a slick animated series and some genuinely cool character designs, just fail? Well, buckle up, because this story has everything. Corporate strategy gone wrong, a legal battle with a reality TV show that's still on the air today, and one of the most bizarre connections in toy history that links C.O.P.S directly to G.I. Joe's universe. In this video, I'm going to walk you through why Hasbro was so desperate for C.O.P.S to succeed in the first place, the insane creative talent behind the cartoon that you definitely know from other shows, and the perfect storm of bad luck and bad decisions that killed what could have been a massive franchise. But first, let me show you just how good this thing actually was. Because if you missed C.O.P.S in '88, you missed something special. The setup. Why Hasbro needed this to work. Alright, so let's set the stage. It's 1987, and Hasbro's got a problem. G.I. Joe, their absolute cash cow, the line that basically saved the company in the early 80s, is getting old. Not literally old, but you know what I mean. The kids who grew up with it are aging out, and the military action figure thing is starting to feel a little stale. And meanwhile, the competition is heating up. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is about to explode. Kenner's got RoboCop figures coming. Every toy company in America is trying to figure out what the next big thing is going to be. So Hasbro does what any smart company does. They try to create a successor. Something that captures that G.I. Joe magic, but feels fresh. Something urban. Something high-tech. Something that screams late 80s cool. Enter Cops and Crooks. Now, right away, they made some interesting choices. First off, these figures were 6 inches tall, bigger than your standard G.I. Joe or Star Wars figure. That meant more detail, more articulation, and here's the kicker. They had cap-firing mechanisms built in. You remember caps, right? Those little red rolls of paper with gunpowder dots that would go bang and smell like the 4th of July? Yeah, these toys actually fired caps. You could simulate gunfire. In 1988, you could still do that without parents losing their minds. But here's where Hasbro made their first mistake, and it's a big one. 6-inch figures don't play nice with 3.7 5-inch playsets. Think about it. Every kid in America already had G.I. Joe vehicles, Star Wars playsets, all that stuff. And none of it worked with C.O.P.S figures. You couldn't put Bulletproof in a G.I. Joe Jeep. The scale was all wrong. So if you wanted to really play with C.O.P.S, you had to buy a whole new ecosystem of toys. That's a tough sell to parents, man. That's a really tough sell. But Hasbro knew the real key to selling toys in the 80s wasn't the toys themselves. It was the cartoon. So they partnered with DIC Animation City to create 65 episodes for first-run syndication. That's the magic number, by the way. 65 episodes meant you could run the show 5 days a week for 13 weeks, then loop it. That's how you kept your brand in front of kids constantly. And here's where things get interesting, because the cartoon they created was actually really good. The World of Empire City, 2020. So the show is set in Empire City in the year 2020. And I gotta say, their version of 2020 was a hell of a lot more fun than what we actually got. So anyway, Empire City is this perfect blend of 1980s urban grit and cyberpunk future. You've got the chrome and neon, but it still looks like a real city. Like if you took New York or Chicago and just added a bunch of flying cars and robot cops. It's not some sterile sci-fi utopia. It's dirty, it's lived in, and it feels real. And the characters? Man, they actually put thought into these guys. The main character is Baldwin P. Vess, codename Bulletproof. He's an FBI criminologist, not just some meathead cop, but an actual detective who thinks like a Swiss watch, as they describe him in the show. He comes to Empire City to take down the crime boss Big Boss Babel. But here's the origin story. During a car chase with one of Big Boss's goons, Bulletproof gets in a massive crash. We're talking life-threatening injuries, so they save his life with cybernetic surgery. They encase his entire torso in a stainless steel shell that manages his vital functions and makes him, well, bulletproof. And he's not alone. He's got this whole team of specialists. LongArm, who's got these extendable cybernetic arms. Bowser and his robot dog Blitz. And we'll come back to Blitz because his backstory is actually heartbreaking. Sundown, who's a Texas Ranger with a lasso. Mainframe, the tech specialist. Mirage, who does undercover work. Mace, the SWAT guy. Bullseye, the helicopter pilot. Each one of them came from a different police department across the country. Chicago PD, Texas Rangers, San Francisco PD, Miami PD. They're like an all-star team of cops. And on the villain side, you've got Big Boss Babel, who's basically Edward G. Robinson as a crime lord with a literal iron fist. A cybernetic hand he uses to crush things when he's angry. His crew includes Berserko, his idiot nephew who screws everything up. Buttons McBoom, this silent enforcer with a Tommy gun hidden in a violin case. Dr. BadVibes, a mad scientist with his brain in a glass dome. Nightshade, this aristocratic cat burglar who actually has a romantic subplot with one of the good guys. The show had actual character development. Nightshade wasn't just evil for evil's sake. She stole for the thrill of it. And she had this ongoing internal conflict about whether she was really a bad person. That's deeper than most Saturday morning cartoons were willing to go. And here's something wild. Remember Blitz, the robot dog? They did a whole episode about his origin. Turns out he was a real dog who sacrificed himself to save Bowser. And they brought him back as a cyborg. That's some RoboCop level storytelling for a kids show. But here's why the show was actually good. The talent behind it. The director was Kevin Altieri, and working with him was a guy named Bruce Timm. If those names sound familiar, it's because they went on to create Batman, the animated series. Yeah. The same team that made one of the greatest animated shows of all time cut their teeth on C.O.P.S. Altieri directed about 32 episodes of Batman, including On Leather Wings. And you can see the DNA of C.O.P.S. in Batman. That urban noir aesthetic, the high contrast lighting, the way they handled action. Empire City was basically the prototype for Gotham City. So you had this genuinely well-made show with solid writing, great action, and a creative team that knew what they were doing. The pieces were all there for C.O.P.S. to be huge. So what went wrong? The perfect storm of failure. Alright, so it's the 1988 holiday season, and C.O.P.S. hits the shelves. And immediately, they've got problems. Problem number one, the competition. Remember how I said the toy market was heating up? Well, C.O.P.S. launched into one of the most competitive holiday seasons in toy history. You've got G.I. Joe still on shelves. You've got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles absolutely exploding. Like, kids are losing their minds over TMNT. Kenner's got their RoboCop line, which also has cap-firing gimmicks. So C.O.P.S. isn't even unique in that regard. And here's the thing about the toy business. Shelf space is everything. If Walmart or Toys R Us only has so much room in the action figure aisle, and they've got to choose between the new C.O.P.S. line and the proven sellers like G.I. Joe, or the hot new thing like TMNT, well, C.O.P.S. is going to lose that fight. Problem number two, the toy line itself. So there were quality control issues. Some of the figures had what collectors call lazy eye application. The paint on the eyes was sloppy. The plastic was softer than it should have been. These weren't terrible toys, but they weren't premium either. And at the price point Hasbro was charging for 6-inch figures, people expected better. But here's the real killer. They didn't make toys of the most popular characters. Mainframe, the tech specialist who was central to like half the episodes? No toy. Nightshade? The most interesting villain with an actual character arc? No toy. Mirage? The female undercover cop? No toy. So you've got kids watching the show, getting invested in these characters, and then they go to the store and those characters don't exist in toy form. That's insane. That's leaving money on the table. And get this, there are reports that some items were just straight up canceled mid-production. Some people think Warner Brothers, who had competing interests with the Police Academy cartoon, might have interfered. We don't know for sure, but something was going on behind the scenes that kept the toy line from reaching its full potential. Problem number 3, the scale issue. I mentioned this earlier, but it bears repeating. The 6-inch scale was a strategic disaster. In the 80s, kids didn't just buy one toy line. They mixed and matched. Your G.I. Joes fought your Star Wars figures. Your Transformers gave rides to your He-Man guys. It was all one big imaginary universe. But cops couldn't play in that sandbox. The figures were too big, and Hasbro didn't have the resources to create a full ecosystem of vehicles and playsets at the 6-inch scale to compete with everything else on the market. So Cops was isolated. It was an island. And in the toy business, islands don't survive. By 1989, it was clear Cops wasn't going to be the next G.I. Joe. Sales were disappointing. Retailers were clearancing the figures. The line was dying. But then something happened that turned dying into dead and buried. In March 1989, a little reality show premiered on Fox. It was called Cops. Problem number 4, the reality show. Yep, that Cops. So now you've got two things called Cops on TV at the same time. One's a cartoon about cybernetic police officers in the future. The other is a gritty, unscripted show following real cops on real calls. And guess which one became a cultural phenomenon? The reality show Cops was a massive hit. It was cheap to produce. No writers, no actors, just camera crews following police around. And it caught on like wildfire. It became one of the longest running shows in TV history. It's still making episodes today in various forms. And they owned the trademark for Cops. So by 1993, when the Cops cartoon moved to CBS Saturday mornings for reruns, there was a problem. The confusion between the cartoon and the reality show was real. Parents were getting mixed up. The brand identity was muddled. So they did something desperate. They rebranded the cartoon. They called it CyberCops. And that was the final nail in the coffin. Because now the cartoon didn't match the toy packaging. The toys still said Cops and Crooks. But the show was called CyberCops. The brand identity was completely fractured. If you were a kid in 1993 discovering the show for the first time, you wouldn't even know there were toys. And if you found the toys at a clearance bin somewhere, you wouldn't know there was a show. It was over. The weird stuff. Comics and connections. Now, before we wrap this up, I gotta tell you about some of the weird stuff that happened around Cops, because this franchise got strange. So DC Comics did a 15-issue comic book run of Cops, and they decided to go way darker than the cartoon. In the comics, Big Boss's vendetta against Bulletproof isn't just because Bulletproof is trying to shut down his operation. No. In the comics, Bulletproof arrested Big Boss's twin brother, who was the crime lord of New York City, and that brother died in prison. So, Big Boss's whole motivation is revenge for his dead brother. That's way heavier than the cartoon ever got. The comics also had continuity errors. Characters looked different. Hardtop had black hair in the comics, but brown hair in the show. It was like they were working from different style guides. And the ending? Big Boss gets arrested for an unpaid parking ticket. I'm not kidding. After 15 issues of crime drama, they arrest him for a parking ticket, which then allows them to investigate him for everything else. It's actually kind of brilliant in a meta way. They're lampshading how ridiculous it is that they couldn't catch him for any of his actual crimes. Okay, this is the coolest thing, and most people don't know about it. There's a Cops character named Checkpoint. His real name is Wayne Sneeden III. His file card says his father was a member of a top-secret military team in the 80s and 90s. You know who was on G.I. Joe? A character named Beachhead. Real name, Wayne R. Sneeden. That's right, Checkpoint is Beachhead's son. Cops takes place in the same universe as G.I. Joe, about 30 years in the future. The Central Organization of Police Specialists is the spiritual successor to the Joe team. Hasbro actually planned this. They created a shared universe before Marvel made it cool. And nobody knew about it because the toy line failed before they could really explore that connection. How crazy is that? We could have had G.I. Joe veterans showing up in C.O.P.S episodes. We could have had crossover comics, but it all died before it could happen. The legacy and modern revival. So C.O.P.S died in the early 90s, and for about 25 years, it was just a memory. A footnote in toy history. Something that 80s kids remembered fondly, but couldn't really share with anyone, because there was no way to watch the show, and the toys were long gone. But then something interesting happened. Those 80s kids grew up. They got jobs. They had disposable income. And companies like Fresh Monkey Fiction realized there was a market for high-quality, collector-focused C.O.P.S figures. They launched crowdfunding campaigns for new 1 to 12 scale figures. That's about 6 inches, same as the originals, but with modern articulation and paint applications. And you know what? They funded. People wanted these. And here's the kicker. They made figures of Mainframe and Nightshade. The characters that should have existed in 1988 finally got toys in 2020. Better late than never, I guess. The cartoon's available now too. You can actually watch it. And if you go back and watch it with adult eyes, it holds up better than you'd expect. The animation is solid, the writing is decent, and that Kevin Altieri and Bruce Timm influence is obvious once you know to look for it. There's a whole community of C.O.P.S fans out there now, keeping the memory alive. People who remember watching it as kids. People who discovered it later. Collectors who are trying to complete their vintage toy sets. It's not a huge fandom, but it's dedicated. And that's kind of beautiful, you know? This thing that failed commercially, that got killed by bad luck and bad timing, still means something to people 35 years later. So what's the lesson here? What do we take away from the rise and fall of C.O.P.S? I think it's this. Sometimes you can do everything right and still fail. Hasbro had a good product. The cartoon was well made. The character designs were cool. The concept was solid, but they made a few strategic mistakes. The scale issue, the incomplete toy line, and then they got hit by circumstances they couldn't control. The market was too crowded. A reality show stole their name. The timing was just wrong. But here's the thing. C.O.P.S wasn't a failure in the ways that matter. It gave us a great cartoon that influenced the people who made Batman the Animated Series. It created characters and stories that people still remember and love. It tried something different in an era when most toy lines were playing it safe. And yeah, it didn't make Hasbro $1 billion, but it made an impact. It mattered to the people who experienced it. And in the end, maybe that's enough. If you enjoyed this deep dive into 80s toy history, you need to check out my video on the complete story of G.I. Joe and how Hasbro almost went bankrupt before that line saved them. It's the perfect companion piece to this, and it'll blow your mind how close we came to never having any of these toys. And hey, if you grew up with C.O.P.S, drop a comment and let me know. What was your favorite character? Did you have the toys? Do you remember watching the cartoon? I want to hear your stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.